是这个。
哦，要草这边是吧？
嗯。
那这个咯。 Hi, Gigi. Can you hear me? Hello. I can't hear you yet. You need to unmute yourself.
Yes, I can
Hello.
hear you. Hello, hello.
Oh, right. Maybe. Hello.
Hello. Yes, I can hear you.
I can't hear you yet. Let me try this.
Can you still not hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Okay. Hold on a minute. I can't hear you yet. So let's.对，我这个已经到了最大的，好像到最大音量，对吧？为什么？
钟老师的音量。
他这不涉及到他的音量，他因为他已经 unmute，肯定会听到他的声音的。对呀，你让你电脑试试看到底行不行？Okay, Gigi, can you say something? See, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
No, still can't hear you.
No. Closer.
This is really strange. No, I mean, I should be able to.
I can hear you
Okay,
fine.
Gigi, I will restart and see how we fix the problem.
Okay, so the same link?
before the real code comes, so we still have some good time to look forward to.
Yeah.
I think you have to adjust it a little bit.
Just what?
The speaker is not working.
Speaker. What do you mean the speaker is not working?
The
Oh.
audience cannot hear.
Ah, where's that?
Or maybe just try my laptop.
See if this works. Okay, let's try again, see if that's better. So, okay, we're almost ready, just to make sure that the sound is okay.
Cool.
So, Gigi, can you say something there?
Okay, can you hear me? I can hear you very well.
This is really, I don't know, we have this problem. And, technology is not always reliable.
No,
Yeah.
it's always especially when you have to link to various sort of external speakers and
Yeah.
and the system get more high tech and they become more unreliable.
I know.
Old-fashioned cables always work.
Yeah. So the best if we could get you come like sometime next year. It's the easiest when you are here.
Yeah.
I mute myself. Yeah. Let's see. Is sound coming? No, it's not.
Can you see something?
Should I say something?
The thing is, there. No, I can't hear. That's a problem.
Gigi, can you see something?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you all very well. It's a little bit echoey, but I guess because there are probably two computers taking sound right now. But otherwise, can you hear me through your PA system?
Yeah, looks like it's working now.
Yeah. If you need me to keep talking, I'm on mute, I think.
Yeah.
Oh.
See. Okay. All right. Okay, so it looks like we are all set. Finally, we are ready. So, okay, I'll sort of start. So, good evening, everyone, and also good afternoon, good morning, because we have speakers. We have an audience online from all over the world. So, right, so to you guys, good morning or good afternoon. And this is actually our second lecture of the C-Stick Distinguished Lecture Series in Translation Studies 2022 and 2023. So C-Stick stands for Center for Studies for Translation, Interpreting, and Cognition. That's the name of our center here. Like 2 weeks ago, we had, or 3 weeks ago, we had our first lecture. We invited Professor Han Jing from Western Sydney University to share her thoughts on her experience of translating or subtitling 非诚勿扰, If You Are the One into English, because she translated 非诚勿扰 into English for the Australian audience, and also had great success. So right, so it was a great talk, and if anyone missed it, especially those online, you could visit our channel on YouTube or Bilibili. It's called Translator Zone, just to watch a replay of the recorded lecture. Okay. So tonight we have got a equally fascinating topic and a speaker, if not more, to address us. So now let me first of all present you our star of the night, Gigi Chang, our internationally acclaimed translator. I'll say a bit about Gigi so that you get you get to know her a little bit. So when you hear her speak and talk later, you can put everything into context. So Gigi translates from Chinese into English. Her fiction translations include Jin Yong's wuxia martial arts series, Legends of the Condor Heroes Volume 2, a Bond Undone. Volume 3, A Snake Lies Waiting, which she translated together with Anna Holmwood. And Volume 4, A Heart Divided, co-translated with Shelly Bryant. All came out at Li Horse Press between 2029 to 2021. And she also translated dramas, plays. Her theater translations include classical Chinese dramas for the Royal Shakespeare Company. If you are interested, you can always get her translation of Dou Yuan, Snow in Midsummer. Okay, and then she also translated contemporary Chinese plays for the Royal Court Theatre, Hong Kong Arts Festival, and Shanghai Dramatic Arts Center. She also co-hosts a regular program on plays and playwrights for the Chinese language podcast Culture Potato. So, well, we know that actually Gigi is really a versatile, she translates, she edits, she directs, she produces, she does lots of work. So, right, I mean, many of us, if not all, have perhaps grown up reading martial arts novels and watching martial arts movies. And actually, one of the more popular book is射雕英雄传, right?
Yeah.
Wuxia. And so when the news came out, I think it's 2018, right? That the first volume of the book.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, translated into English and achieved great success in both sales and also transmission. Many, became extremely excited, and of course, at the same time, we became very curious because, as I sort of put down in the introduction on the poster, I said, well, some are curious how the seemingly untranslatables in Jin Yong, like the fascinating martial arts moves, Xianglong Shibazang or Jiuying Baiguzao, right? And also the outrageous, nicknames of the characters Huang Laoxie, Lao Du have been translated. And others are keen to explore the driving forces to make the English translation so successful in its transmission and impact, right? Is it really the translators, exquisite rendering skills, or the seamless collaboration, right? So, or the publishers, clever allusion to the popular Lord of the Rings, all these will be sort of the topics we'll be, discussing tonight. So really tonight we are really pleased to have Gigi with us, and address some of these questions we have with us. But tonight we're sort of taking a different approach. In our first lecture, we had Professor Jing sort of delivering lecture of about an hour. So tonight, instead of having Gigi lecturing to us, we are taking a more sort of conversational approach. So that is the event will be involving like Gigi as a star, me as the host. So I'll be raising questions, and then Gigi will be like sharing her thoughts with the prompts of these questions, and then this will be followed by a reading or recitation of her translation, some of excerpts of her translations, and also comments. Okay, and then towards the end, we'll open up the floor for questions and answers. Okay, so that's what's going to happen tonight. And for those, when we open up the floor for discussion, like those here in the room, you just raise your hand, you'll get the chance to ask questions. And those online, you can always leave your questions, comments on the comments in the comments area, or in the chat box. We'll get your questions answered as well. Okay, so now maybe so Gigi, could I invite you to sort of formally say hi to the audience online and offline?
Yeah, of course. Hello, everyone. I'm really thrilled to be here tonight in Shenzhen. I'm connecting from Shenzhen. Unfortunately, the COVID situation meant I'm not really able to travel to Macau. And also partly because I'm also kind of behind with working on the next volume of the Condor series, the Condor Heroes series, the first volume of Return of the Condor Heroes, 神雕侠侣. So it's due imminently. So I've been at the desk rewriting furiously.
Right. So great. So we'll just sort of get the ball rolling, because we do have a good number of questions to address tonight. Right. So the first question is really ask you to could I ask you to say a few words about your background and how you got involved in translation, why translation of martial arts fiction, and why, Jin Yong's in particular?
Well, I got into translation sheerly by chance. I read history of art at university, and my first job graduating from university was actually working in a museum to help curate as assistant curator of a major exhibition on contemporary Chinese design. I got the job obviously mostly because I spoke Chinese and I had an arts and humanities background, which at the time is actually quite rare in the sort of early mid-2000s. Unlike today, there are so many Chinese international students around the world studying every conceivable subject. But when I was at university, you really don't see anyone that isn't that is from other ethnicity when I was studying in London. Because I was working on an exhibition about China, naturally I have to do quite a lot of translation in the workplace, be it to communicate between artists participating in the exhibition and the museum at large, and then I also ended up doing quite a bit of writing translation, which ended up on gallery walls or in the exhibition catalogues. So those were my first published translations. And then when I left London and moved back to Hong Kong, where I grew up, I worked in theatre. That's my other love. And in Hong Kong, because of its colonial past, anything funded by the government, any public bodies, will have to provide bilingual content. So be it marketing, promotion, or information about the shows, down to subtitles when you are at the show. So that gave me chances to do translation, the less interesting one, like, house program, marketing copies, press releases, and the more sort of sexy work of making subtitles or translating the plays for publication. So that's when I sort of get the chance to explore more what we call literary translation. And when I was working in London in a museum, I happened to meet Anna Holmwood, who at the time was learning Chinese. And after she finished her university and postgraduate courses on the Chinese language, she started working as a literary translator as well as a literary agent. And whereas I moved from arts to theatre and beginning doing more translation. And we sort of semi-kept in touch over the years. And when she was agenting, she had many writers and many books that needs English samples so she can sell the international rights. And we got in touch with each other, and she invited me to do some excerpts for her. And she really sort of opened the door for me to more formal literary translation in terms of fictions. And she was also the person that asked me if I would like to join her to translate Legends of the Condor Hero. She is really the person that's instrumental in bringing it to English. So because she's a literary agent, you know, she's very aware of what's being translated and what's not translated, what's missing in the market, what has opportunities. And she discovered that the Condor trilogies, all 3 books, the English rights has not been sold. So she worked together with another agent, Peter Bookman, and they secured the rights from Jin Yong's estate. And they found our publisher, Mackley Ho Press. The process probably took about a year or so. And she prepared all the documentation from the sample of the story to all the pitching document, introducing who Jin Yong is, introducing this trilogy of the books, and introducing why, or writing a very strong pitch why he should be translated into English. And one of the strongest sort of reason why Jin Yong should be translated is that he is one of the best-selling author in the world, probably top 5 or so, because Jin Yong's books there is a ridiculously large pirated market, so no one really knows exactly how many books he sold. But the official numbers is at least 300 million copies of over 15 titles, in between 15 titles. So he is probably internationally the best-selling author that you've never heard of. Well, at least this is we're talking about 10 years ago. So sort of in about 2012, sort of Anna and Peter Bookman and managed to persuade Mackley Ho Press to Christopher Mackley Ho, who was the founder of Mackley Ho Press, to take on the books. And so all 3 novels, Legends of the Condor Hero, Return of the Condor Heroes, and Heaven Saber Dragon Sword, all 3 will be published by them. Right now, we have completed Legends of the Condor Hero, which is the first novel over 4 volumes. And the next one will be Return of the Condor Heroes, which will again be split into 4 volumes as well. And then the last one, which should be split into 4 volumes, but that's a bit distant in the future.
So, Anna Holmwood, like you said, she was studying Chinese in London at that time. Like, where was she studying? Like University of London, or do you have
no? I think she did. She was, I think, if I remember, she definitely spent some time at SOAS. Before that, I think she was at Oxford.
All right. Yeah.
I could be wrong.
Yeah. That's all right.
But SOAS, I know for sure. SOAS, I think that's correct.
That's good, because the SOAS was where I taught for 7 years before I came and joined University of Health. So
wow.
Yeah. So I was there for that. Right.
I almost took a course in SOAS.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So now, like you are translating the Return of the Condor Heroes, 神雕侠侣, right? So for the first project, like the Legends of the Condor Heroes, how many years did it take you guys together to finish the entire project?
So almost 10 years. Anna, so it probably took a year to find a publisher, from between securing the rights, because that's some negotiation, and selling the rights, that's more negotiations. So that's probably between 2010, sort of late 2010, 11, 12. That's a very early part of the 2010s, were involving in the sort of securing the rights and sales of the right. And Anna really started translating about 2012 or so. And we didn't publish the first volume until 2018.
Right. Okay.
I joined the project in 2015, and I worked on the second volume, A Bond Undone, and that came out in 2019. So my first volume, well, the second volume, A Bond Undone, took probably about three, or not quite 4 years, about 3 years or so. So it's quite a lengthy project in the sense that it takes a long time to translate and to rewrite. And then there's also a significant chunk of time spent editing, proofreading, typesetting, getting it into the book form you see. Yeah.
It's a huge project.
Yeah, altogether about 10 years.
Yeah. Just a few words about Shelly Bryant. We didn't seem to hear a lot about her in her project. Tell us a little bit about her, how she got involved.
Yeah, so Shelly and Anna, well, Shelly is a very, very prolific translator, and she's been working in translation for a very long time. Before COVID, she lived between Singapore and Shanghai, and Anna and Shelly met actually in Singapore. I think Anna was doing an event about Condor Heroes in Singapore, and Shelly was hosting it. Okay. And they got talking, and we have always wanted to find a third translator to work on the project. But it is never very easy to find someone, because anyone that came after me, they have to match their style to 2 different persons. Right. And they would also have to learn half of the novel first, to the point that they can start whatever work they have. So Shelly, in the end, came in on the 4th volume. And we worked very closely on that together. Right. And it was actually quite a tough job, because she came in right at the end when a lot of things already been set up, which means there's a lot of things you have to learn and get used to. And also the way we translate is that we are very open to be edited by each other. So throughout the process, when Anna was finishing up book 1, I was already looking through her manuscript as it was being edited, to see whether it can match with the story that comes afterwards, and the choices that I will be making because of the plot lines or the character development that comes in afterwards. Right. And because when we set out to do this project, our editor, Paul Angles, our publisher, Christopher MacLehose, and Anna and I, we really want to have one voice over 4 volumes. It doesn't matter who we are doing the translation. The book has to read as one, because it is one novel by one author and one single story about the same bunch of characters. So we spent a lot of time working with each other to it's not really about match our style, because any translator is a writer. So automatically we have some ability to imitate someone else's writing, because that's not very difficult. But what's really hard is trying to match our eyes, the way we read, and the way we think, and our brains, the way we process. Yeah. So the English that is being written down, the thought. So we are matching the way we understand and matching the ways we interpret. So what comes down in writing will feel in spirit similar, not just in the sort of surface linguistic style. Yeah. So that is what we spent a lot of time working on. And as Anna started doing volume 1, so she really established the main direction of the style. So she is the person that sort of devise all the tools for us to get through this jungle. If I use an analogy, yeah. Whereas when I joined the project, I actually had to do quite a long sample for the publisher to show that A, I can translate, B, is I can match Anna's style.
Right.
So when I did that, I chose what I thought would be the beginning of book 2. And then I read Anna's manuscript up to that point. And then I started doing my own first draft and then sent that back to Anna for comments. And she gave me very detailed line edits and line notes on, especially on what more significant, more drastic decisions that she has to make with the text. A very simple example would be the section that I've got has soldiers chasing some our protagonists. So the soldiers were shouting something, essentially saying, "Stop!" You know, if you run, and you know, and but in Chinese it could be a whole line, like 20 characters. But whereas if you want it to feel immediate and real in an actual sort of chase, whoever that is running around, on, be it riding on horseback or chasing on foot, they're not going to be, you know, spewing an essay about how you should stop and who's chasing you and how I'm going to beat you up, because their body is too busy doing something else.
Right.
So it's how to kind of crunch down and digest that information. We don't necessarily delete it, but we give the quote or that dialogue in a way that is realistic or almost like almost like cinematic or televisual, like, as in it would be a script and you could see someone saying that line, but at the same time the other information this person has provided might be relevant to the readers. So that part of the information maybe then we reworked it into the prose that linked all these dialogues together. And that thinking process is what we try to match as I worked on the sample and also throughout the translation, because each of us will have characters that we create and we come to new scenarios that our characters will, that changes our characters in terms of their worldview or, you know, physical, there could be physical effects as well. So how do we build up on each other's decisions upon the story? So, yeah.
Do you think like to this really working together, getting one voice or one style for the 4 volumes? I mean, it must have taken you lots of time and lots of efforts, and because when we speak of style, you know, we speak of the style of the translator, right? The translator style, the style of the original author, or, you know, so because, you know, if we speak of sort of translation theory, you know, in the traditional or most conventional definition of translation or translator, the translator is not supposed to have a style. His sort of role is to reproduce the style of source text author in the translated text, right? Yeah. So now, because you've been discussing the style like you have adopted for the 4 volumes. So if we now do an analysis of the translations and we sort of describe the features, the linguistic, the stylistic features of text, do you think that's the style of the original author, Jin Yong, or is it more your, like, a combination of the styles of your 3 translators, or is it something sort of in between these?
So I guess probably I should roll back a little bit and explain a little of sort of what we set out to do when we are translating. What I think sort of the first question before we start a text, especially someone like Jin Yong, we ask ourselves, what is unique about Jin Yong's writing? Which I guess in a way is not even style anymore, it's more the essence or the spirit of Jin Yong across his stories, regardless of which title. And I think all of us would have the experience of it being unputdownable, as in once we started reading, we can't stop. We physically inhale the book until there's nothing left to read. So it means we don't go to the bathroom, we don't eat, we don't sleep. And I think all of us had some form of that experience. And also it's really fun, it's rip-roaring fun, it's very exciting. You know, you just want to be the protagonist, you want to be everyone in the book, and you want to have their adventures. And if you then break it down into sort of more concrete way of sort of why it is so unputdownable and why it is so fun, then it would probably be because the way he writes his prose is very effortless. It's very easy to read, even though it is a little bit archaic, but it doesn't stop a 10-year-old from going through 1 million words Chinese characters in a weekend. It has very memorable stories and characters, and I think that is proven by how many screen adaptations that he's got. He's got more than 100 screen adaptations, and they are very, very exciting fights. I think with a book where it's probably half of the content it's fights, the way when you talk about it, it's probably like, oh god, that's probably quite boring. But when you read it, you just can't. You just want to keep reading more. You don't want them in between parts. You just want the whole book to be fights. So when we set out to translate it into English, we want to capture all of that, which, simply put, is recreating the Chinese reading experience. So every decision we make is to make sure that the book is unputdownable and it is rip-roaring fun. And that the prose has to be effortless. The memorable story and characters isn't so much the translator problem, because that's written by Jin Yong already. We just need to make sure that, you know, we don't distort it. And the fights being exciting is our work, because English and Chinese are so different, and the fighting system, the martial arts system, is so different. And that's that could be another 2 hours of conversation on that. So sort of once I sort of set that up, sort of back to whether a translation, you know, whether we are conveying Jin Yong's style, I would say we're conveying the spirit of the story and the characters. I think when you're translating fiction, I would say we serve the story and the characters rather than the author. The author creates the stories and the characters, but in a story, the person that wrote the story, unless for particular reason, shouldn't come before the story or the characters is created. But that in a way has to do with my own interest and love for theatre, because, you know, if you think about when you watch a film or TV show, or when you're in the theatre, what engages you is really what's the story that is unfolding on stage, and how is that story told. So the same story told in different ways one could be very exciting and the other could be very tedious. So and in a way, as a translator, we are only deceptively objective. The whole process is actually it couldn't be more subjective, because whatever goes in through my eyes, through my head and my body, and come out through my hands in another language, all of my it's impossible to separate yourself, especially if it's fiction, from from your output, because how you understand the story is conditioned by your background, your interests, your gender, your age, all of that. And then how you then tell that story, all those factors come into play as well. So if I translate it today from 5 years ago to 5 years on, it will be a completely different work because I've grown up, the world has changed. And someone else doing it will be different because they would have a different educational background, they would have different interests, they would have read different books as they grew up, which affected how they make choices on the plot, on names, on everything, because every word is a choice. And all of that those choices overlap and snowball into what you see in a book.
Right. So
I hope that kind of answer your question.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Like, so here, because it's interesting that you mentioned like your style might be different, like say 5 years later. So you think your style as a translator will change, right?
I think we change with the book. So whatever work we work on, we mold ourselves to our impression of reading that story.
Mm-hmm.
And what we think the general impression of reading that story would be. At least for me, that's how it works.
Okay.
Because you got to connect and engage with the work from the heart, because otherwise, if you're bored by it, then you will ask your question, why are you bored? Is it you that didn't want to read that work? That's why you don't, or is it the work itself is boring? Or is it some other factors? It could be your mood, it could be just something, that content that you just don't agree on. It is possible. But there should be like a general impression of the general readership, which doesn't really exist. But then there is, I personally believe that, there is still like a catchment of readers or audience that would understand or connect with the story in similar ways. Because otherwise the book wouldn't be published if it couldn't connect with anyone.
So here, like readership is really important to you.
Yes, definitely.
When you translate, you think about your readers.
Yes, they are always in the room with me.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
That's a very good way to put it. It's in the room with you. So if
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sorry.
Okay. Good. All right.
Sorry.
My question is, like, if I ask what was your sort of anticipated readership, how would you sort of describe it? Because we say, like, generally, and I think when we learn translation at universities, teachers tell the students, okay, always think about your readership. What kind of readers you're translating for, what are their needs, then because we believe these, your readership, expected readership, prospective readership will have an impact on how you translate, the approach you take, the methods you adopt, the strategies you use. And, because I remember if we refer to just sort of another major sort of a masterpiece of Chinese literature, like Hong No Meng, right? We know the best known translations are by Yang Xianyi and his British wife, Gladys Yang, and the other by John Minford and David Hawkes and John Minford. And very interestingly, because I think Yang Xianyi and his British wife were invited to Australia and were interviewed, and there they were asked to compare their own translation of Hong No Meng with that by David Hawkes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then there was a very interesting, actually, discussion on that. I remember, like Gladys Young said, our translation was sort of dull and pedestrian because we did not know exactly who our readers were. But for David Hawkes, they knew like the kind of person they were translating for. She actually used a very, very interesting term. I can sort of read this quote. I've got this quote here. He said he can do that because he knows his readership so well. He's writing for his compatriots. We are translating for faceless people. This is especially true of the English language translations. We're not just translating for Americans or Australians, but for all those people in Asia and Africa who also read English, so that we do not know who our readers are. So, right. So my question to you is, like, who, like, did you sort of conjure up in your mind as your readership?
So I think I probably have to also explain a little bit on my background, because I worked in the museum, and my first really formal writing training came from writing museum descriptions. So the little labels that you see next to the objects that explain what it is. And in a museum, you don't choose who comes to you and who reads it. And so I was trained to write for children, to pensioners, people that knows absolutely nothing about the thing they're looking at, to expert that knows more than you. But the point is, we have to, what you write, they have to be able to learn something or gain something from it. So even though you're an expert on whatever you're looking at, it still makes a connection with you that you perhaps haven't thought about. So in those sort of 50, 60 English words, we have to get our point across. We have to connect directly and personally with the life of the people that came to the museum, which is mostly British people, but there are a lot of international tourists as well, of different level of English, or some that doesn't speak any English. So that's and so that really changed the way I still see writing coming out of universities, or the way academia, or when you're at school, you're kind of more in an ivory tower. You set out to be different or be difficult, but you don't set out to reach to as far as humanly possible. And then being in, so loving theatre and working in theatre, the greatest fear is people walking out. So everything you do is to keep people's, to put it sort of crassly, is keeping bums on seat. And there's nothing more horrifying. I think a playwright might be Howard Brenton, who said, the sound of a chair flipping up in a quiet auditorium. So that fear has always been inside me. When you translate in writing in a book, you don't know if someone's actually read it. You know, they might, or you see sales figure, but what they do with a book when they get home, who knows? I've bought enough books that I've never even opened and touched until maybe 15, 20 years on. So with that in mind, our readers, when Anna and I and Shelly are working on this series with our editor Paul, we want to reach as wide as possible. So we're very aware that we will have kindergarten children, people with absolutely no idea who Jin Yong is, who has never read anything in translation or translation from Chinese, doesn't really know anything about the genre of wuxia, probably not particularly interested in fantasy or historical fiction, but somehow they ended up with the book and opened it and started to read it. We want to grab those people and so keep them with us. And then we know on the other extreme would be what I would call in academic terms postdoctorate fellows. Readers that read Chinese, can read Chinese, know the Chinese very well, watch multiple TV adaptations, possibly read fan translation online in English, and then they come to ours with probably quite a critical eye or curious eye, want to know how you do it. So you essentially are talking to people who could barely walk, to people that can run in sort of Olympic Games, professional athletes. And we want to cater, we want to try to keep everyone interested and engaged without losing anyone in the process. And that goes back to what we set out to distill Jin Yong's spirit, the spirit of his writing, is to recreate the Chinese reading experience, making sure it is fun and unputdownable, because that is what his writing is about. And so in that sense, when you're translating, you're constantly aware of these two extremes. And then later on, when the book started coming out, we also realized that not just in print form, there's also audiobooks. So audiobook, there are so many people that just listen to books now. They don't read. They don't read the actual writing. So, and the experience of reading through your ears instead of your eyes is very different, because it becomes very linear. You can't flick back and forth very easily. So you actually have to tell your story even clearer than you would be telling in writing. So yeah, and that inform our every decision and every word is, am I explaining this clearly enough for those who know very little? Am I over explaining, and is it getting tedious for those that know a lot? But one thing that brings everyone together, I would say, is that there is one common language between all of these readers, is that everyone would have seen some form of fighting on screen. In TV show, it can be anything from James Bond to The Matrix to even Star Wars or Harry Potter in that sort of Western international Marvel universe films, or Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon Heroes to the latest Xianxia TV show. It could be anything. As long as there's someone throwing a punch at another person, fast-paced excitement, it can be a car chase. It doesn't have to be, a horse chase or a boat chase. It can be anything. But that physical expression, the artful expression of fighting, of violence, the artistic packaging of violence and fight choreography, that is something every single person today knows, because unless you've never seen a film before in your life or a TV show. So that is the common language we draw on when we translate. Anna talked about it in a way that's very, because obviously Anna grew up speaking English and Swedish, and martial arts novel wasn't what she grew up with. But she's seen Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. She knew about Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, Jet Li, and now we've got Ip Man, Kung Fu Hustle, Kung Fu Panda, even if you've never seen a real person fighting. So all of that informed how you would come to the book. And so that is also what we draw on as we translate. So that is something that is the great leveler between all of our different kinds of readers.
Right. So here, I think that's a fascinating discussion. You're talking about readers on the two extremes. So if I say it's actually the readers on the sort of lower end, right, who didn't know much about the martial arts, then needs to be particularly sort of taken care of in the translation. So, what did you do anything sort of particular to help the readers on that sort of the lower end? Because for Jin Yong, when we read Jin Yong, there are so many things you can take for granted, because we are so familiar with martial arts, we read so much, watch so many movies. But then for translators, I may say that you may have to sort of add something, or adapt something for readers who do not have this much exposure to martial arts. Can you sort of
So what example? Well, the very simple thing that we've done is we do have a list of characters, and we also have endnotes appendices that have notes on historical figures or more complex historical elements or cultural elements. Also explaining a little bit of our translation decisions and things like that. There's very short, informative little paragraphs about factual things, factual points that is not worth explaining in the story because it interrupts the flow, and it's not really necessary to know, because if you don't know that, it doesn't. You can still understand what's going on. But whereas a very easy example to say how we clarify certain cultural elements is that in the martial arts that Jin Yong writes about, you can do a lot of damage by activating someone's acupressure points. So 点穴, so you can freeze someone's movement, you can hurt them, you can kill them, you can do a lot of things. You know, the finger of death. And in Chinese, he would only put the acupressure point name on. So actually, as Chinese readers, we know that he talked about someone poke someone somewhere or hit someone on a very specific point, but we don't actually know which part of the body they were being hit on. Whereas when we're translating in English, we make sure that every single time someone got hit on the pressure point, we also add in the body part that it's being tapped. So 百会, gathering conversions or 100 convergences is at the top of your head, the crown of your head, and just mention the top of the head. Or I think it's called ban on the pool, which is the inside of the elbow. I mean, every single time there's a pressure point that comes up, I'll have to look up the chart to find exactly where it is. But then once you sort of start giving, are you hitting someone in the neck, in the chest, in the stomach, on the back, on the arm, on the leg, then immediately it doesn't matter what that point is called. It's very physical where the impact is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's that kind of tiny additions that you probably wouldn't notice unless you.
Yeah, I mean, all these things are really helpful. I'm sure, like for the readers. And I also noticed like there is a UK version and also a US version of Legends of the Condor Heroes. So why are there the two versions here? Is that the sort of
the content in the same?
Okay.
So what in English translation is kind of like Chinese publishing. You got the simplified Chinese and the traditional Chinese, and they're different copyright regions. So the mainland region and the which is the simplified Chinese, that might include, say, Singapore, and then there is also the traditional Chinese for Taiwan region, Hong Kong, and so it's for different different readerships, not different readership, but different printing, font, typing, and whereas sort of in English language writing. Publishing as well, the market can also be split into many small parts. So there is North American, which would be America, Canada usually, and they would use American spelling, so color without a U. And then there is World English, and sometimes that can be carved into smaller chunks like Australia, South Africa, World, Commonwealth. That just depends on the title. And so the British version has British spelling. The North American version has North American spelling. Yeah.
Great. We're talking about 射雕英雄传 because 射雕英雄传 is like no ordinary fiction. It's a martial arts fiction, right? Filled with fighting scenes, martial arts moves, and also those crazy names. And also the philosophical, the Dao references in and also the language too, right? Even the language, because it's not modern contemporary Chinese, sort of 半文半白, right? So all these could be sort of challenges for any translator, right? So maybe talk about the language first. As we said, it's sort of 半文半白. Was it a sort of a challenge for you, and how did you sort of tackle this? Because I found in one of these reports about you and your translation, I found this quote attribute to you. 在功夫招式之外，金庸小说中的修辞、语法、句式都对翻译提出了很大的挑战。比如汉语几个字就能把一个动作或者招数写完，但译成英语可能会需要一长段句子。再有，金庸的小说是半文半白的形式，这样在翻译时就不能完全按照现在的英语形式。最终我们参考莎士比亚的那种古英语的文风和句型，尽可能的让读者感受到故事是发生在离我们非常遥远的时代里。So could you sort of elaborate a little bit, like how was it really a challenge for you, and how did you really approach this?
So I would say in general, our sentence structure is modern. So we don't write, in, thou art and thee and whatnot. But we avoid using very modern phrasing or anything that might give you like the sense of a digital time. So because if you write everything in a very archaic form, it becomes very plodding and leaden, and it drags, and it completely goes against our experience of reading Jin Yong, which is unputdownable, which is fast. So our sentences, the structure, the sort of deeper level is modern. Often our sentences are very, very short. But the word choice we use, we avoid anything that is too, we don't say, hey guys. So that kind of thing, there's no what's up in there, but we're trying to sort of make it work in a way that give you a little bit of sense of time every so often, but without being so old-fashioned that you just feel tired reading it. And there are particular sort of areas sort of referencing. So I've been reading a lot of Victorian novels and sort of earlier sort of mid-20th century before that, to sort of get a feel of different writing. So I'm more immersed into a slightly older language, because I have no problem writing the modern language, all of us being, 21st century readers and, being alive in the 21st century. So there's also that sort of dynamic going on.
Right. So it's a martial arts movie, fiction, like martial arts movies can be really challenging. According to the reports, you actually did some preparation by learning to play Tai Chi and also Chinese bamboo flute, 笛子, right?
Yeah.
Stuff, right?
Yeah, I don't take. I still practice Tai Chi, and I'm still taking classes on 笛子 and xiao both. Yeah. I'm a very bad player, but yeah, I'm learning both 笛子 and xiao, so both side blown and long and vertical. Yeah, it really, the thing about sort of Chinese martial arts is that when you read Jin Yong, it's very exciting. They all fight, but actually, until you start learning, then you realize how much of Jin Yong's writing is actually actual combat. So the language he used, the vocabulary he used, is an existing vocabulary in Chinese martial arts. So a very simple movement, a push or a lean, a cut, it has corresponding action in different types of Chinese martial arts. And when you started learning, you realize that's very simple word actually contains an explosive power, because you can't do it as a beginner, but you can watch your shifu do it, and when you look at your shifu do it, you think, yeah, I'm going, if he does it to me, I'll probably like faint, I'll be knocked down on the floor and pass out. So, and that really gives me like an extra insight into the martial element. So rather than, it's not just people flying around, there is within the words, you kind of, need to work out the level of violence that you want to convey in English, because in English we have to find our own vocabulary to explain all these movements, because at least in modern days, the fighting we see is boxing, mixed martial arts, wrestling. And those are fairly, and also you can see them also classical, taekwondo and etc. But they are so structured and such physical contact sports that you don't really get that sense of that fluidity. At the same time, is extremely violent. So I guess an example would be, if everyone remember Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, there is a scene where I think Michelle Yeoh and Chow Yun-fat are fighting in the bamboo forest, and they're jumping across the bamboo and they're swaying along, and they're standing at the tip of the bamboo, swaying along as they fight. So physically, it is like a dance, but they were fighting with swords, and when they start getting close to each other, it is an extremely violent and explosive act, even though, no one actually hit anyone and there's no blood and gore. But what's made that film so great is that you get that beautiful choreography, but at the same time, you also get that little sense of violence that is part of Chinese martial arts. That's explosive, 春劲. So it's trying to get that sense across in English as well, getting the excitement, at the same time getting the right level of violence, or the heaviness of a punch, or smack of the hand. Yeah.
So right. So because I find it really interesting, in actually several reports about your translation, you were quoted as saying that you used a strategy called, I don't know, that's not the exact trans. I mean, you have a better term for it. It's sort of a cinematic shifting or switching, as a strategy to create these fighting scenes. Because I think you also discussed how Jin Yong had a unique style of narration, like shifting perspectives when he described a fighting scene, sometimes from Guo Jing's perspective, and then next minute it'll be describing it from, say, Huang Laoxi's perspective, or Qi Gong's perspective. So, because again, I have a quote here, like, so 比如说一个武打场面的描写，一会儿是以郭靖的方式看敌人，下一个是以欧阳锋的视角看郭靖，下一个又是一个混合视角，不停的跳动。这种不停的跳动的视觉，在英语小说里是比较少见的。So, right. So I just wanted to sort of ask you to elaborate a little bit on this, and so that we can hear direct from you your thoughts on this, and if possible, give an example as an illustration, if you do.
Yeah. So when Jin Yong himself is very interested in cinema, so he wrote script, and I think he's done a little bit of directing as well. And when he writes these stories, he really wrote it almost like a script, not in terms of sort of simplicity, but in terms of how there are camera angles. So you see, as the quote you said, that you quoted, you see something from character A's point of view, and then you might hear his thought or her thoughts, and then you're looking at the same thing from another character's point of view, and it keeps switching back and forth between these different characters. And if you think about sort of martial arts films or any films you've seen, that's very easily done by just cutting from one, a mid shot of me and then of you, and then maybe a side one of the two of us talking if we were in the same room. And that has great effect, immediately set up the relationship, the relationship between the two persons, their relationship with the environment and what's going on. But in a book, that's actually not so easy, because in writing, well, it's flat and black and white. And the only way you can switch between people is mentioning their names a lot. And and also because if you keep mentioning people's name, then the prose will become very heavy, and then we sort of go back to the problem: how do we write an unputdownable book? Your prose has to be light, it has to fly, has to have some form of levity majority of the time. You know, when it should be heavy, it can be heavy, but it has to move along by itself. And so it really sort of thinking of it from a cinematic point of view really helps, because you start seeing, okay, what he's trying to do is showing character A, then character B, then character A, then character B, and each of them have their own internal thought process expressed. But if you think about the English language novels you've read, a very simple example that has relatively quite a lot of action, I would say Harry Potter. Majority of the story, you follow Harry. His friends, Ron and Hermione, are often with him, but you really don't hear them think so much. You hear Harry, your point of view is mostly from memory. I mean, it has been close to 20 years since I last read Harry Potter, but at least the impression I got is we follow Harry. It is mostly, it's not from the story wasn't told from his point of view, but we follow him from a disembodied sort of high up position. And when he faced Voldemort or whatever the bad guys that he's facing, we are looking at it from his point of view. We don't usually flip between the bad guy and the good guy constantly, shot by shot. Whereas in cinema, you could do that very easily. And Jin Yong writes it in a way that is more cinematic, in the sense that we will flip between different characters. And I can probably read out a section later on to explain that.
Okay. Yeah.
Or if you want me to read it now, I can probably.
Maybe we can talk about the translation of a few sort of moves before you read a few for us. Like we have to talk about the martial arts moves, because it's a martial arts fiction. So like for example, like a Xianglong Shibaza, right? I mean, that's something many of us wish to have. The kind of power we wish to have. If when we see something bad, something evil around us, we want to have that power. So how because I think the translation was 18 dragons subduing palms, right?
Yes.
Right. So because there are many sort of moves in the book. So how did you actually sort of discuss among yourselves how you translate these moves and also those crazy names, or did you have any discussion about it, or you sort of just?
We have long discussions about those, and the names constantly change throughout the draft. So we will start out with a name. So we talk between ourselves, the translators, and we talk with the editor once he gets to see the full manuscript.
Yeah.
But before that, there will be conversation between the translators on what to call something, because I might call it A, and Anna might call it B, and Shelly might call it C, because we're working on different parts of the book simultaneously. And we definitely sort of look online at what some of the translations are, because Jin Yong's story's been adapted to many screen versions. There are subtitles, so there are existing names in the out there in the fandom or in the sort of greater Jin Yong universe. But it doesn't mean we will always use those names, because they might not fit in with what we set out to do in our translation. So with 18 Dragons Subduing Palm, I think it is also something very similar online that you will find on Wikipedia or elsewhere. But as we translate, as the story moves on, it mostly became Dragons Subduing Palms. Mm-hmm. Because we just dropped the 18, because every single time you mention the number, it drags the prose down too much.
Right. And then also the names of nicknames of the characters in it. I remember I read in news that there was even a debate about the translation of the names of people, because some people thought, I think that was referring to the first volume.
Yeah.
Some people were saying that Anna was not consistent in the rendition of these names. So
we are very whimsical. Sorry to cut in about it. About translation, we really went with feeling rather than a very strict system of how names should be translated. And when I talk about feeling, it's more about, as a Chinese reader reading the Chinese text, what impression that name gives you. So because Chinese characters have meanings, when we see a name, we see meaning rather than hear sound. So that's very different from English and other languages where it's phonetic, whereas alphabets and the words has absolutely no deep down meaning whatsoever. So we kind of approach the name from like a Chinese reader's experience. So certain names jump out at you as either really out there, a bit silly, or you very quickly realize they're very much related to that character's destiny or fate or personality, or it goes very much against their personality or what our image of them. A good example would be is actually what I'm working on now. In Return of the Condor Heroes, Li Mochou. Her name is kind of without worry, literally in Chinese, but she is the most bitter. He's the most troll. She is so dragged down by her past that her name is the biggest joke on her, I think, on her person. And such a name, one look at it, you will never forget. Or something like Huang Yao Shi. Again, you don't forget that sort of name because it's really odd. And you see it, you see the meaning. And I guess sort of part of it so all of us sort of came to it, be it from Pinyin is actually quite hard to remember, Pinyin names, because we see characters then immediately know who they are. But whereas Pinyin names, the simple example is that Qiu Chuji and Qiu Tianren, in English, their family name is both Qiu, and they suddenly become one big happy family. So we kind of, what we want to do is sort of give a taste of what we see and what we get as Chinese reader, rather than just reducing the names and the meaning of the names into, and diminishing it into just a bunch of flattened Mandarin sounds. And I guess part of it to do with, we all have our own dialect growing up. I grew up speaking Cantonese. So I type in Chinese with Mandarin Pinyin, but if I see a bunch of Pinyin, I never know who, I don't know what someone's called. And if you are Chinese introducing to another Chinese person your name, you say it, but often you explain how to write the character so people don't get your name wrong. So I think sort of in that sense, we really want to convey the meaning of the names. But we are also aware that these days with the proliferation of TV series, subtitles, obviously, because they are paid so little and they have to churn them out so quickly, they obviously will use Pinyin because that's the easiest thing to do, because you don't actually have to think about it. That is not a choice, or that is the easy choice. Whereas if you want to if you're translating names, you are making quite a controversial decision to convey a meaning and giving up something that perhaps now compares to say 10 years on, 20 years on. Using Pinyin is really the norm now. Whereas even if you look at John Minford's translation of The Deer in the Cauldron, or Hawkes and Minford's translation of Dream of the Red Chamber, they took on a lot of translation of names to get the meaning across.
Mm-hmm.
to set out the different tiers. But they have a much more structural system than us. We were like, this one feels like this.
Yeah. So I was curious, like, did you, because there were a few books published before, like books of Chinese martial arts fiction, like before your translation sort of started, or in the middle of, like, while you were translating your books. Did you actually refer to those books for any information, or did you, like, were you even interested in reading some of those books? Like,
no,
yeah.
I made a point of avoiding all of them. And I'm also avoiding, the only thing that I would read would be Anna's translation and anything that we translated between us out of the novel, because I don't want to be affected and influenced and accidentally plagiarizing them. Because it's very easy to do that without knowing. Because, you know, the last thing you read is the first thing you write. And I also made a point avoiding every single Jin Yong adaptation of Legends of the Condor Heroes. I don't even look at pictures of the latest version, because I don't want to see how other people has imagined the characters. I need to keep what's in my head pure as in pure and clean and clear to just what Jin Yong wrote and how I imagine Jin Yong's writing, rather than filtered through someone else's imagination.
That's a very wise move. I believe sometimes I tell my students not to do that when they are translating, especially when there is already a sort of translation somewhere. Because if you read it, then you get sort of, you know, so much infected by how they translate. You might, start using their words or interpreting the story in their way. So that's probably not advisable for a translator. You were saying that you like to sort of keep it, you know, your understanding of the novel all the time. Yeah. And then I also remember reading somewhere, like, when you described how you try to sort of stay in the story even when you go eat and you work on your Facebook or Instagram. That's very interesting. And also, like, because you are sort of, in our term, will be a freelance translator.
Yeah. So
self-discipline is very important, right? And I heard that your dog helps you, sort of keeps you at work, right? Yeah.
I mean, definitely, because for us, like, there is a collective imagination what the book novel is through each volume. As we translate, we build on between the translator and the editor, we build on each other's imagination of the book, and we are already influenced by endless sort of media that we see. And I'm one of those person that really can't start. So when I start at 7:30 or 8 in the morning, I pretty much work straight through until sort of 6:30 in the afternoon. Obviously, I stop to eat and go, you know, make tea and go to the bathroom. You know, all the sort of human needs have to be attended to, and there will be difficult portions where I just go on YouTube for 2 hours, or just scroll on Twitter or Instagram or whatnot, and looking at all kinds of silly things. But as a whole, I try to keep my head within that world. Because often the difficulty about sort of translation and rewriting, you already actually have everything in front of you. As in, you have a completely, if I use an analogy, a fully cooked, beautifully presented dish. You taste it, and then you have to recreate it with different ingredients. Now, and then what readers see is the Chinese version and the English version. You don't see all the process, that great big tangle ball thread that's in between. How did I arrive at this point? Because it's not a straight line. It's often back and forth and upwards and downwards and in every single conceivable direction. And sort of for me, it's just try to stay in that thought process. So it's sometimes it could be working out why a character is saying this. Why is they doing that? A fight scene in a way is quite straightforward because people are fighting. The emotions are clear. They are clearly on the opposite sides. That's why they come to punches. And the reason usually is also quite clear, you know, there is some form of vengeance, you know, someone kills someone else dear to them, etc., or they want to take something from the other person. So that's very clear. But when you have the sort of the scenes in between, where there's more emotional involvement and more emotional development, now we see what the characters is saying, but do they really mean what they're saying? Is there something else that goes on? Now, that is something that's interpretation. That is not, Jin Yong might not expressly say, you know, character is saying something, but he really means something else, unless it's something that he really wants to make sure the readers know. So with that kind of content, you really have to follow through the whole development up to that point. How that one character thinks, how they express, and how this person usually express themselves. Is it an honest character? Do they say what they want all the time or what they mean all the time? Or do they never actually say what they mean? And then, but then, you know, there's never just one person talking to nothing, to the air. There's always someone responding. There could be 2 or 3 or 4 persons in the conversation. So each of them, you have to follow through this thread of thought. And the many layers of meanings that they want to convey or don't want to convey. And in that sense, I think that's really the complicated, the really difficult part of fiction translation, is to get into the character's head and get into multiple characters' head at the same time and keep it clear, especially with a novel this big, which is about 1 million Chinese characters, and in English, I don't actually have probably about 600 to 700 English. I'm not entirely sure. I don't actually remember how many words there are anymore. But anyway, it's long enough. Yeah. So and sort of over quite a lengthy period of time, people's mind change, and you have to keep track of all of that. Yeah. And I guess sort of in the end, the majority of the work we put in, the sort of more subjective work, is actually in that aspect.
Yeah. We've been talking for an hour and a half. I saw a message that we've got some questions coming, like from online audience. So maybe before we go to the questions, I will. This is a time to ask you to read probably 1 or 2 excerpts of your translation, and then share with us, you know, the joy of reading these translations. Do you want to share your screen or you just?
Oh, I just go.
Okay, that's.
So I'm reading it from the physical book.
Good.
So I am just going to share a couple of fights. Let's see what's the time going. So this is a fight from the second volume of Legends of the Condor Heroes, and it is the point when Guo Jing is fighting for Lotus Huang, the girl that he's been spending the first 300-400 pages of this volume with, fighting to marry her. So he has to. This is before the fight starts. Actually, no, we haven't even got to the fight where he wants to marry her. This is when her suitor comes to ask. Lotus's suitor, Gallant Ouyang, came with his uncle Viper Ouyang to ask for Lotus's hand. Guo Jing doesn't actually realize that he's got a love rival at this point. And this fight is between Viper Ouyang and Apothecary Huang, so Ouyang Feng and Huang Yaoshi. And they're fighting with musical instruments. which is some of the biggest sort of headaches in these novels, is that writing about action is hard enough. Writing action and music, which is two things that can't really be conveyed with words. You just really want to cry. So Viper Ouyang sat cross-legged on a nearby boulder. He balanced the zither on his knees and closed his eyes to gather his qi. He then plucked and strummed the first notes with his right hand. The zheng was known for its melancholic twang, and this variety from the western regions was particularly mournful. Guojing had no ear for music, yet he noticed that each time a string rattled, his heart pulsed. As Viper Ouyang played faster, his heart throbbed along uncomfortably, as if it were about to burst out of his chest. Realizing he could die if the tempo increased further, he sat down to gather his spirit and still his thoughts in the transient way. As he channeled his internal energy around his body, his heartbeat slowed, and soon he found he was no longer ensnared by the music. Viper Ouyang's playing had accelerated to the point where it was impossible to distinguish between individual notes. A wall of sound pressed into Guojing, as if 10,000 horses were galloping towards him, or hundreds of battle drums were being beaten. Now and again, a gentle crooning rose above the twang of the zither, growing more confident and persistent. It brought a flush to Guojing's face and a flutter in his chest, prompting him to turn his focus back to controlling his senses. However loud the zheng was, it failed to drown out the murmur of the xiao. Each master held firm to his own tune. Together they produced a raucous discordance. The iron zither was a call of monkeys and apes in a remote mountain range, the hoots of owls in a dark wood. The jade flute was songs under the spring sun, whispers in the Magian chamber, fierce grief against the softly sensual. When one tune rose in pitch, the other descended. When one reached a crescendo, the other fell, all but silent. Neither succeeded in dominating the other. So this is a scene, they're fighting with internal forces, which is channeled through the musical instrument. And that music has a physical effect on our protagonist, Guojing. At the same time, we've got two different sonic quality, a string instrument, a metal string instrument. So I guess, you know, if you put it in modern words, probably like an unplugged electric guitar. And then a shell flute, a woodwind instrument that is quite airy and quite breathy in sound. So when I was translating, I was trying to convey those sonic qualities in the choice of words as well. So the flute songs has a lot of S. The words are softer, whereas the zither, you know, is twang. There's a lot more K and T and harder consonant as well as harder sort of end sound. So it sounds like, so you get that sound, that differences in words. Yeah. So I think this really sort of sets a lot in what I've been talking quite a lot between shifting perspectives. You know, we have three characters. We move from Viper Ouyang, who plays the zither, to the effect of the audience, Guojing listening to it, his heart beating. Then someone else, Apothecary One, cut in, and then it conjures a different physical reaction in Guojing. And then the two martial greats fight each other with their musical instruments.
Right. So, I mean, because I'm conscious of the time, I don't want to keep you here all night. So we might as well just now do with this one reading. We'll, like, when you have a chance to listen, we can read more. So so now if I sort of invite you to sort of step back from your epic journey of translating this great book and distance yourself from the translation itself for a moment, which you might have already done. So tell me, what is translating to you? Like, what is translation in your view? Because I also read in the reports you had very interesting metaphors to describe, to explain translation. You compare translation to walking through a forest or a jungle, and you also compare translation to chow mein, Chinese fried noodles. So yeah, maybe you could just explain that to us. Why you thinking translation is like walking through a forest, and
So translation, why is like walking through a forest? And the thing is that you have probably a very clear starting point, as in you've got a text. It doesn't matter what translation you're doing, commercial or literary, creative or anything. You have the source text and you know where your end result is. You have to have a finished text in the language you are translating into. But depending on the length of the text and the content, you actually never know how you're going to get there. It's an exploration. You might not even have the tool to get across to the other side. As in, you have the basic tool, as in your person, and you have your strength, as in your language. But how do you, hack through the undergrowth, the thorn, and whatnot? How do you deal with the wild animals that you might meet along the way? That is something you don't know until you start translating. And how many problems and then the more you translate, the quicker your reaction is, but it still doesn't necessarily means you have the right tool to deal with that text, because every text is new. So which is why I think, in a way, because when you sort of talk about, especially these days with much more, much easier access to translation technology, AI, and, Google Translate, automation, all that kind of thing is. And then you also see the mistakes or sort of silly jokes that by using just relying purely on technology would create. It's that difference between the human mind and technology, or the digital artificial mind, is our sense of judgment, how we formulate the tools with our body. Because I think that's would be why I say it's like walking through, trying to get through a jungle. Yeah, so because you have to fashion your own tool to find your way through the text. And for me, translation is really, at heart, is about communication. Mm-hmm. You're trying to communicate. You're not necessarily talk. It might not even be through words, but you're trying to get through something, a message, to people that may share something with you or share absolutely nothing with you. But ultimately, we are, well, in terms of writing translation or translation of words, languages, we're talking to human beings. So, we have birth, we have death, we have emotions. We have full use or not the full use of our body. And all of that is shared not just with human beings, but actually all living creatures like animals, more sophisticated mammals or less, depending whether you want to connect with them, you're willing to connect with them. And so I think as long as we've got that common ground, we can find ways of communicating or getting our message across in a way that hopefully the other side can receive. It's the Star Trek First Contact. What do you do? How do you talk to a new alien species? Or that's in Star Trek, without any of the common language. But it's reaching out, and hopefully they will take your hand.
Yeah. And you see translation more than a cultural bridge. You use a matchmaker to
yes.
the metaphor for translator, right?
Yes, because I think, yeah, I think we're more, without realizing, we're actually much more active than and particularly with literary translation, because I think all of us had read a translated novel that isn't very well done, And the result of that is that it can put you off that country's literature for life, which is not too bad result. But the really bad thing is it can put you off all translated literature for life. And then suddenly and then for a lot of people thought, that doesn't really matter. Who cares about what goes on in other worlds? I can't read those languages anyway. But if you think of it the other way, the sense is you'll be cut off from the majority of the world, however many population, number of people, stories. Isn't that the greatest loss there is to any person, any human being, that sort of losing the chance to get access to so many different times and people and cultures, and which is why sort of I think we do exist to entice and to draw people together, and you do have to work for it, because it can be a great book, but if you don't work to convey the greatness of it or what's interesting or attractive about it, and if you don't know what the other end can not understand what connects with them, then you can't bring the two together, because the book exists, though passively exists on paper form. Once you start reading, it is you drawing the reader into that world through your words. So there's like that active element within the sort of quite a passive sort of packaging.
And translation teachers like to say, like, we all have a translation theory. We all have our own theory of translation. So if I pressure you for a theory of translation, how would you describe your theory of translation now?
I would call it, as I said before, bums on seat. I'll do whatever to keep you with me.
Okay. And say if I ask you what is your sort of criteria for a good or adequate translation? 1, 2, 3. Like
an adequate translation. I think it got to give a similar sense of the original. If it's fun, it's fun. It should be fun as well. If it's fast-paced, it should be fast-paced as well. Yeah. If it's meditative, then it should come across in a similar way, especially for fiction. I mean, other than, the typical thing is, you're saying more or less the same thing. You're never going to say exactly the same thing, but it'll be more or less the same. But I think for me, it's getting that feeling of the content, that emotional engagement, or the aura that it creates in reading it, trying to capture that. And that's for fiction.
Okay. I may have many more questions, but we can save that for later, for your next trip to Macau. So before I ask my sort of final question, which I really want to ask is, do I have questions from my students here in the room? Because I may not be able to get to the questions online, but I think we'll save those questions, pass those questions on to Gigi later on, and then see if there's a way to get the questions answered. Do we have any questions from floor here? Yes, please. Dr. Wu Kan. Right.
Regarding the research. So I have a question regarding the research. Because some readers from Amazon.com and bookread.com there is a general reminder of heroic fantasy like Lord of the Rings during translation of chat. So, according to your professional experience of translation, what do you think could be the main factors contributing to such a genre reminder? So, could it be cultural elements, or characterization techniques, or simply translator styles, or preferences, or other elements? Thank you.
Did you hear the question?
It's a little bit broken up.
Yeah. Yeah, come over here because the connection is better here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I caught the letter half. It's just the sort of very first beginning.
Okay, sorry, I will repeat my question. So my question is that some readers I catch from Amazon.com and Goodreads.com report that when they read translated wuxia, there is a deja vu reminder of heroic fantasy works, for example, Lord of the Rings. So according to your professional translating experience, wuxia, what do you think could be the main factors contributing to such deja vu reminder? So could it be some cultural elements, let's say, or characterization techniques, or simply translator style, preferences or others? Thank you.
Yeah, I think in a way, we draw on all of that. Like we draw on everything, someone I'm born in the early 80s. I grew up obviously with a huge screen I guess I grew up with probably a good portion with the same sort of visual references with a good portion of the readers. We sort of, when kids, we're made to read the classics, and then they saw the screen culture or the big movie franchise and stuff. And so in a way, for me, I think what the book
Technology again. Looks like she did drop off. She's coming back. I hope it's the final part. Yeah. Sorry. Here. She's there.
Sorry, I disconnected just now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I was just like, I think it just what you grew up with and what you like really influence how you see things. And I would admit that it definitely influenced how I read. Obviously, I read Jin Yong when I was like 10, 12, 13. But when I read it now, I see it very differently because there's that sort of 20 odd years of experience of all the popular culture then sort of mixed in, and I'm seeing new connections I didn't realize before. And when anyone new reader comes to it, they will come with their own background and interest and what they like and what they don't like. And you can see that in readers' sort of reviews online, so what they react to and what they react to, whether be it things they like or things they don't like. So often there are people who say, oh God, why are there so many fights? It's just like interminable. And there are plenty of Chinese readers that would complain about the fights because it's just like, why do they keep fighting? Can't we just get on with the story? Because some people want to read the love stories or the adventures without, 30 pages of exchanging blows. And some people really engage with the sort of greater historical context, like, with Legends of the Condor Heroes, with the Genghis Khan and the big battles when the Mongols march west. And that's because maybe those readers really like sort of war films, epics, and that kind of epic. So it just really depends on the person and what you like and what you don't like.
Right. So any other questions? Quick questions? Yeah. Okay. So I think I'll ask my last question, which is very much like a gossip. I read in the news again, like in the reports, I think Anna is considering a change of her career path. So I was wondering, what is your plan? Like, what are you what's your plan for the future? Do you think you'll be a translator for long, or any thoughts on that already?
In the near future, in the next few years, I'll still be translating because I'm working on Returns of the Condor Heroes. So I will continue to work on that. So there are 4 volumes of that. So, so that's what I'm working on. And I do really enjoy translation. And if there's more opportunity, I mean, we never really got to the point of, it's not easy making a living as a literary translator, because as you can imagine, the publishing industry doesn't make a lot of money. So obviously they're not, how many people are buying books these days? How many people are reading books these days, let alone buying books? So how many, and then out of that, readers of translation, a really small portion of the bulk readership in English. And then you have, so you can imagine, we are paid, but we aren't paid in a way that you can live in the big cities or in the center of the big cities. So if there are more opportunities, I definitely love to keep translating, and there are definitely more translated than books about. And I love to do more theater translation, but again, that is even more niche.
Yeah, super. I'm glad that you are translating, because I remember like earlier on when you were asked whether like what you will be doing like after you finish translating the Condor Heroes, and then you say you were not sure whether you will be translating the Return of the Condor Heroes, but now you're already translating it. So I'm very pleased that you are actually doing it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So despite, as you said, like you this payment for translating these literary works will not sort of enable you to live in a big huge city, right? But it's the love for translation that keeps you going. So that's really something admirable. So
I mean, it's definitely a very privileged job. You are, especially to students. I'm paid to read, and I'm paid to write, rather than paying someone to read and study and learn. And it is a work. It is a very satisfying work, because you learn so much through the process. You improve yourself as a writer. You learn all kind of strange and wonderful things because of the subject matter that you're translating, because you really have to get to know it well before you can write about it. And to be paid to read a novel and spend your waking hours with a novel, that's a real privilege.
Right, super. So right, so thank you very much for this really, almost 2 hour, sharing with us, with our students, with our audience online. So, maybe, as I said, like I had to skip many of our questions. So I think maybe when you, publish the Return of the Condor Heroes, we'll have the return of Gigi to speak to us again about, translation of Condor Heroes, whether it's the legends or the returns. So right, so we'll make that happen. So on behalf of my students and also all those audience online, I just want to say thank you very much for this fantastic, sharing with all of us your experiences, your thoughts, and your strategies about translating, a unique genre from China, because like really Chinese martial arts is a great treasure of China and also of the world, I would say. Like, so Gigi together with her collaborators, Anna Holmwood and also Shelly Bryant, have done a beautiful job, taking Chinese martial arts to the world. So let's put our hands again and thank Gigi for her great work and her sharing tonight.
Well, thank you everyone. Thanks for having me. It's my honor, really.
Yeah, thanks very much. So we'll stay in touch and then invite you back later on. Okay, thanks.
Yep. Great.
Right, so
thank
you. That's almost the end of our talk tonight. So just a little bit announcement about our next talk. Our next talk in this series will be on November 1st. This time we're turning to simultaneous interpreting. So we've got invited Liu, a VECA coordinator, and also the ICE member based in Hong Kong, as you know. The formal announcement will come up later on, so stay tuned on YouTube with our translator zone or Bilibili Yizhan. So thank you all very much, and thanks to all those online. And of course, thanks to our speaker Gigi again. So that's all for tonight. We'll see you later and on another occasion. So bye, Gigi. I'll stay in touch
bye,
with
everyone.
you. Yeah.
Yep.
Bye.
Great. Bye.
Bye.